Hi, and welcome back to the HSP Connection podcast with me, Philippa Robinson.
And me, Robbie Lee. This is where we share our stories, insights, and strategies to help fellow highly sensitive people navigate their own path to living a fulfilling and meaningful life. Philippa, what are we talking about today?
Robbie, see, I managed not to start with well.
You did, but now you're bringing it up.
And now I've done it. Oh, damn.
But you did it. Good job.
Okay, Robbie, today
Yes.
I wanted us to follow on a conversation that we recorded in real time. We recorded it yesterday. I think it will have been last week's episode by the time this comes out. We recorded an episode about how, yes, we're HSPs, but how different we are and how being an HSP shows up differently in our lives. And today, what I wanted to do was follow on a little bit from that. And as we've already said, we've got no idea really where this conversation's going to go. So we're just going to see what happens. But I wanted to talk about how, yes, we're HSPs. It's innate. It's in us. It does inform who we are in the world in lots of ways. But also it's part of who we are. It's not everything that we are. I mean, it's involved in everything that we are, but it's not just we're an HSP and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you agreed to have this conversation with me, and it felt, I don't know, it feels like, it does feel like something that I really wanted to talk about. And over and above that description of what we're talking about, I'm not actually sure what I mean by it, but I am trusting that by having this conversation with you, whatever it is inside me that needs to come out is going to happen. And you're trusting yourself too, because you felt that we could do this.
Absolutely. And these are some of the most fun conversations for me because we literally, you said everything that we know that we wanted to say about the topic already. And so now we're just like, okay, let's see where it goes. But there was something about the topic that we both felt juice around, which is why we're having the conversation. So thank you for bringing it up. This will be a fun adventure.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that came to me already as you were talking is, I mean, of course, I totally agree. Being highly sensitive informs everything. It is definitely a part of who I am, but so is being a woman in a patriarchal society for me. So is being over 50 in that same society. So is being a queer woman in that society. You know, these are also things that are woven into the fabric of who I am and inform things about my life and how I am received in the world and how I filter things. So I resonate with what you're saying about being an HSP is part of the whole that makes us up.
Yeah. And it's really funny when you were talking then, my whole body's just gone, oh, yeah. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, there is a conversation to be had here. And you're absolutely right. There are, and I think it's really interesting, and the way you just went then is really key, isn't it? That we are affected by so many things outside of us, externally. Like you say, you know, the patriarchal society that we have grown up in and still live in. That you know how we feel about, you know, be it our gender, be it our sexuality, be it whatever else, be it the fact I've got white hair, you know, what I don't know, whatever it is. And I'm not likening my hair to actually bigger subjects, but you know, there are ways we feel about those things, and which are informed by how we feel, as well as how other people we are made to feel by the systems and structures that we have to live within. And it's very hard very, very hard. In fact, I was having a conversation with a client about this earlier, about how do you strip away all those other things to work out how you feel about it. And it's really, well, it's impossible, because how we feel about it is very much informed by other things. But I think we can strip a lot of it away. Even if we can't strip it all away, we can sometimes strip a lot of it away. And I do think, for me, discovering I'm a highly sensitive person, made a lot of sense to me. It just, when I learned about it, I was like, yep, that's definitely me. The more I have accepted it, the more I have understood it, the more it makes sense of a lot of things that have happened in my life. Not a week goes by where I get a little memory from the past and think, oh yeah, that's why, I don't know, that's why I reacted like that, that's why I said that, that's why I felt like that, or whatever. And still, those are still happening. And I found out I was highly sensitive for sure 2.5 years ago. So still I'm getting those little connecting the dots with things. And it is really, being highly sensitive is really important. And that's what we were talking about last week, wasn't it? How we would not change it. Yes, it has its challenges, but we absolutely would not change it, because what it brings to us is so wonderful.
Yes.
And it's not just that's not the entirety of who we are.
That's absolutely right. And as you were talking, I was thinking about other things that kind of inform there's introvert, extrovert, which is one of the things we hadn't mentioned yet. But there's also things like, you're a mother, I'm not. We're both married. You have a differently sexed partner. I have a same sex partner. The families that we grew up in, I was raised in a really religious household. There was trauma there. I know there was trauma in your growing up. Yeah. There's so many things that go into I think like a cake batter, go into the cake batter, and then genetic, the genes we inherited.
Yeah.
And, all that just goes into the cake batter of who we are. And how our brains work, how they fire, what things our system needs, and how we experience the world. Like, there's just so many layers to it, which I think is really fascinating. Like, when you were talking about stripping away all the things, like getting to the core, I was like, what is the core?
Yeah.
Like, it really has my mind going, interesting. But I do have a sense of something in the core. Like, I really do. I have a sense of something in there that I sometimes refer to as my inner self, or my higher self, or my wise self. Like, there is something in there that doesn't seem to be impacted by all those external messages. It seems to be tied into something else. I don't know. Has me floating around thinking about that now. That's fun.
Well, that's just made me feel really emotional.
Oh,
so that is really key. My eyes are all teary, and I think you've really hit not a raw nerve, but you've really got there is really something in that. Of course there is. And I think you're absolutely right that there is that core in us that doesn't change over time. I think the way we see it, the way we feel about it, the way we react to it, the way we ignore it, the way we take notice of it, that changes over time. But that absolute core of who we are is pretty I wouldn't like to say from a development point of view when it becomes fixed, but I feel that part of me is I was going to say he's very young. I think it's very playful and very fun-loving, and which is really interesting, because I've said before on the podcast that I have to work at play and fun. It's getting less, actually. It's coming easier, and I'm but there is that inner part of me, and I connected straight to that part when you said about when you mentioned core. I was like, oh yeah. It's definitely young, and by young, I suppose I don't mean childish, but maybe there's childlike quality to it, which is less conditioned, less, because kids are just kids, and they just play and they do what they want until, unfortunately, they learn that's not always they learn
something about them is wrong,
or certain ways to behave, and certain where things are expected, and it just piles on and on and on and on. And I think for me, that essence or that core is my unconditioned self, maybe.
I like that.
And she's pretty great.
Yes,
she's pretty fun to hang out with. She just doesn't get as much airtime as I'd quite like her to have, but and she's a big part. She's a real integral part. She's almost the part. She's the core that all the other parts hang on.
Beautiful.
And she's wise, and so what I'm thinking of as I'm trying to decide whether to say it, is that where my high sensitivity comes from? As in, is that the center of my high sensitivity sort of thing? I don't know. I suspect it might be, and it doesn't really matter, because it's part of who I am anyway. What's coming as I'm talking?
I was feeling emotional, like when you were talking about kids who just are themselves, like free. When I think about kids before they've been conditioned, I think free spirit, I think joy. It feels expansive. It's being in the moment. It's enjoying what is in front of you. Like there's a lot of joy there. And then as he started giving words to like the conditioning, it just felt like it's almost like encasing them in like clay, and it was like layer and layer and layer and layer. And it was like, it was like it was hurting. It was hurting my heart. I could feel it. And then that made me think of little Robbie. It's like, that was the experience she had, for sure. And we all have it,
Yeah.
And so then it made me start thinking about what are the qualities of my inner me in there.
Yeah.
And joy is definitely there. When I think of that inner part or that wise part, it's joy, love, and it's this peacefulness, but like in a really grounded, like a surety of who we are. It's like there's power there. It feels powerful, but not ever power over, but just power in, power in myself, of just knowing who I am. And
knowing, that's the word that came up for me when you were just talking. Knowing.
Yeah. Oof. So now this leads me to go, okay, how do I let her out more? How do I access her more often and let her drive the bus more frequently? Because even in describing her, it's just like, oh yeah, that energy feels amazing. Love that. Yes.
Yeah. I agree with you. How can we? And I do think, I think now, those parts of us are having a great time having this conversation. So, we're both grinning like Cheshire cats and sort of, woo, yeah, we've got like this sort of, I don't know, quite childlike energy about us for the moment. It's great. It's quite buzzy, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think part of why I wanted to have this conversation, which is wonderful and has already taken a turn that we weren't expecting. It was because we've just done the summit, the HSP Virtual Awakening Summit.
Mm-hmm.
I always say awareness, which is completely wrong. The HSP Virtual Awakening Summit, and it's very apt, actually, awakening. I mean, obviously, it was called Awakening for a reason. And we've made lots of great connections there. And I know there were people who attended that summit and listened to some of the talks who really, during the week of the summit, discovered they are highly sensitive.
Incredible.
And, I'm guessing some of them are going to be listening to this podcast. I hope you are. And any new listeners, hello. And if you've just discovered that you're highly sensitive, then great, brilliant. Welcome to the club. And, I think I remember when I discovered I was highly sensitive, it was like a big thing for me. And I needed to talk about it all the time. And I wanted to talk about it all the time, even if I couldn't, because I didn't have the right people to talk about. But it was right in the forefront of my mind and I was feeling it a lot. And I kind of just wanted to honor that and know that that's probably quite possibly what you're feeling and experiencing now is quite normal.
Yeah.
And it does move on from there to be something that, how would I describe it? That I now totally accept and embrace about myself. And I know not everybody gets there in 2.5 years. It does sometimes take longer. But, where I am, I totally accept and embrace that about myself. And it is a very important aspect, innate part of who I am. And there are other parts as well. So I think what I want to say is, although it might seem really big and massive and maybe a little bit overwhelming at the moment, but please know that I suppose the best way I can describe it is it sort of settles down and settles in. Would you? I mean, you had a different experience to me. So what would you say?
I actually agree with what you're saying, though, because and integration was a word that came to me. It's just like it gets integrated into,
great word, brilliant,
the rest of me. And it makes sense. Like when you first discover this part of yourself. Now, the reason you're saying it was different for me is because I heard the term and then I was like, oh yeah, that describes what's wrong with me. But then that was kind of all it was. And then I went on with life. But when I started really educating myself about what it means to be highly sensitive, that from that point to now, I think is a similar journey that when you were talking about. And because then it was just like, I want to know everything about it. And I need to talk about it and process my life now through this lens. It's like, now I'm looking in the past and go, oh, like you were mentioning earlier, it informs so much.
Yeah.
And to me, that process makes sense because it's like we're shining a light on the part of us that didn't get any attention before. And so it's just like, oh, you're paying attention. Well, let me tell you about this and let me tell you about this and let's feel this. And and have you noticed that, it makes sense. It's just like, yes, I have the microphone now. Somebody's listening.
And I'm going to use it.
I've got to use it. Yes. And so then, you can it can for sure feel big, but then once that all starts settling and integrating for you and I, the experience is now it is a really important part. I mean, our podcast is HSP Connection. I mean, so it is still an important part, but it is a part of who we are, and it's been integrated into the whole of us.
Yeah. Brilliant. Boom. There we go. That was the point of the point, I think. Yes, that's right. To just let people know, listeners know that if it is feeling big, it does integrate, and it really does become just a part of who you are, and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And it's just who you are and what you do, and it informs so much in a really beautiful and brilliant way.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And I want to add to people, it can be really helpful when you're on this journey to find other people to talk about who really get it, find your community of like-minded people, because it can be really painful when you're discovering this new thing about yourself and you're trying to talk to your family who still doesn't have any idea what you're talking about. Then that can hurt. And there are ways to do that too that you can learn, but also find your people who get it, so that you're not having to explain things, that you can just be and go, oh yeah, they get me. They get this part of me. They get this part of me, and I'm not having to explain it, and I'm not having, like, I can show up how I am, and they're like, oh yeah, me too. Find those people, it's really helpful.
Such great advice, that actually seek out people who do get it.
Yeah.
Before you start trying to explain it to anybody else. Because I think it's very hard to find the language around it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And when you have embraced it a bit more for yourself, and you've spent time with people, and maybe read a bit more, or whatever it is that you've done to inform yourself a bit more about the trait, then maybe you can start to talk to other people about it if you want to. I mean, you don't need to ever tell anybody. I mean, why wouldn't you? But there isn't a need to ever actually tell anybody. And, please don't start with your family. Because, a lot of us start with our family hoping to get, a big embrace and wow, and how amazing for you. And I didn't do that, because most of my family aren't here anymore, or I have a complicated family setup. But I know people who have started with their family and got a lot of blank faces.
Yeah,
which is hard to take when you're still trying to integrate it yourself.
Yeah, that's the piece of it. Obviously, people do what works for you on your timeline. That we're just sharing what our wisdom that was true for us. But the reason it can be so challenging, like, to talk to family early on, is because it's so new, and there's so much energy around it for you, and it feels so big and important. And so it feels like people's responses feel equally big and important, like you're needing a certain thing from them, and it's really not fair to put that on them, because they don't necessarily have the tools and yada yada. So that's why we're saying, find the people who get you, so you have your forum and your place there to be like, oh yeah, and this and this, and they're like, yeah, we get it, us too, know. And then when it's not so raw and so sharp and so everything, then it just becomes easier, if you feel like it would be helpful to have some of these conversations with family. It doesn't feel so, well, I'm going to say dramatic words because it feels dramatic. It doesn't feel so life and death, right? It doesn't feel like everything's on the line if they don't respond correctly.
I'm sure, I know I've said this before on the podcast and told you this before, but when I realized I was highly sensitive, I deliberated for I don't know, a week or so, and then sent a message to two friends of mine. I sent them a WhatsApp message saying, I've got something to tell you. I want you to know that I'm highly sensitive. And it was like, oh my God. And they had no idea how big a deal it was, and I didn't get an answer for a few days. In fact, I think I had to prompt them and say, did you get my message? And they were like, oh yeah, what does that mean? And I was like, oh my gosh, it had been such a big thing for me to say it. Like, I didn't say it out loud, I said it in a WhatsApp message, but still, it was just really interesting. Whereas, if somebody came to, we have a community. So, if somebody turns up in our community one day and says, I've just discovered I'm highly sensitive, we'd all be like, oh, wow, that's brilliant. Congratulations. And how do you feel? And, it would be.
And welcome.
And welcome. And I'd be sort of swishing my homemade pom-poms around. And,
exactly.
It would. And how different is that? So really, that's the difference between finding the right people. And that's life generally, isn't it? Finding the right people at the right time for what you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and I feel drawn to say this, that this conversation that we've just had, right? And I, I think we've perhaps said now most of what we need to say around it. And I'm really glad I brought this up, because it feels like have you noticed the energy between us as we've been talking about this?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
And oh my God, I had a really good point then and it's gone. Damn, what was I going to say?
It's coming back.
Oh, I know. Right. So this is an example of our high sensitivity working.
That's right.
So for some reason, I decided I thought this was a good conversation to have, especially on the back of the one that we had last week. So I was trusting my intuition that was a good conversation to have. Robbie heard what my idea and trusted her intuition that, there's something in there.
Something there. Yep.
Both just decided to go for it and trust that we would know not know what to say, as in there was a right or a wrong, but we knew that we could have a conversation about it because we were trusting our intuition, and we were letting the highly sensitive sort of part of us drive this conversation. And literally, when Robbie said the word integration, I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's the whole point. That was the whole point of this conversation. So that's why actually we said we were going to call it something else, but we're going to call this episode
integration.
And it's just wonderful. I love seeing this feeling this in action. And I hope, listening to this or watching us on YouTube, you might have got a sense of what was happening for us as we had this conversation and how that has worked, because literally we had no idea what we were going to say.
I really love that you put words around that, like you pointed out what had happened so that others can kind of be on the journey with us. And I think, Philippa, it's one of the many reasons, but it's toward the top of the list why I love our conversations, because we are able to just sink into our gifts and just flow with it. And it's magical. It's fun. I don't know. Floaty is a word for me. Like it's just like it's like following the juice. It's like, ooh, you said something and I felt this, and then I said that, and you're like, yeah, and I got this, and then it's a lot of fun for me.
It is a lot of fun, and we both started off a little bit like, I've had quite a long day, and what because it's my evening and your morning, and but as the conversation's gone on, we've both become much more energetic, and that's our high sensitivity energizing us, because we're having a deep, meaningful conversation. We're talking about something that's important to us. It's important to us that we share things that we, God, we hope they're useful.
Yes.
And and it's not just. I was going to say it's not just us wittering away. Well, sometimes wittering. I'm not meaning to demean what we're saying. I'm really not. But we are just having a conversation that feels important to have, and we are. It's really coming out in real time, and it's really happening, and it brings us so much joy.
Yes, it does.
Oh my goodness me! I'm going to have to come. I'm going to have to come down a little bit now to go to bed. But yeah. That was a little bit of magic.
It was. Thank you for the topic. Thanks for jumping in and trusting with me. And thanks for just the conversation. It was super fun. It did feel like a little bit of magic. Yeah,
it did. And if you're sitting at home thinking, oh my God, who are these women? Don't worry. we're all right, and we'll be back. We'll be back next week with maybe a more sensible conversation. But also, if you don't, if you want more magic, let us know, and we'll do this a bit more often. Although I think we'll probably end up doing this a bit more often anyway.
I think so. Yeah, there's a bit of this in most of our conversations. This one was just, I think we usually can see farther down the path on where the conversation might go. This one was just like, we have no idea where it's going, and so it made it even more magical.
I think this is what's happened on some of my favorite episodes as well. Flow, I thought, was really good. And, forgiveness was, I always keep coming back to that episode that we did on forgiveness. I know you knew what you wanted to say, but the way it all unfolded was just wonderful. So, thank you for having these conversations. Thank you for being here and us doing this together. I really appreciate that we could do this together.
Me too. It's my favorite.
Yeah, mine too. And on that note, I think we'd better stop now and wish everybody a good week. And we'll see you next week for another episode. So for now, it's bye from me.
And bye from me.
Thanks for listening to HSP Connection. If you've enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate the podcast and share it with anyone you think might be interested. It helps others find us. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave us a review.
To get in touch with us, you can email us at hspconnectionpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you with your thoughts and comments on the episodes and any suggestions you have for future topics and guests.
We are both HSP coaches and speakers. And to find out more about Robbie, go to Robbie Lee, that's leigh.com.
And to find out more about Philippa, go to safeandsupported.co.uk. See you next time.